As more and more of us spend our days in front of screens, balancing family, work, and an always on life, we are slowly beginning to notice something. We are losing touch with our surroundings, with our loved ones, with our friends, and quietly with ourselves. And despite having all the comforts life has to offer, many of us feel lonely. We can call anyone from our phone book, but real connection feels harder to find. Because loneliness isn't just about being alone, it's something people feel even when they're surrounded by others. I have recorded a series of conversations exploring this very experience of loneliness. And I invite you to take a small pause and listen to this one. If you do, there's a good chance you'll begin to understand this quiet condition that's slowly finding its way into all our lives and some insights into navigating it. I'm joined today by Joanna, who I'll be addressing as Jo through our conversation. Jo is a psychologist and researcher who has spent decades studying how we think, feel, and connect with one another. She's the co founder and board chair of the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, a global effort working to better understand loneliness and help build more socially connected communities. Over the years, Jo has worked across research, clinical psychology, and public policy, including serving as a professor at the University of Western Australia and contributing to major initiatives focused on mental health and social connection. What I find especially meaningful about Jo's work is her commitment to making psychological science useful in everyday life, helping translate research into insights that can genuinely improve how we live and relate to one another. Jo, it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to join you.
Thank you. Jo, how do you usually introduce yourself these days?
Do you know that's one of the hardest questions because I'm getting used to the idea that I am now retired. so, so I am a retired professor of psychology. And in the academic world, that means I'm taking an academics retirement, which usually means you ditch the administration. You don't really have to apply for grants anymore, and you probably don't work with students, but you do all of the rest. That's the really fun bits. So I still do a little bit of research, a little bit of consulting, and of course, I'm now very much engrossed with the work I do for the charity that I helped to found, which is GILC, the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection.
So, if I can say you're having the cake and eating it too?
Close to that. Yeah. But of course, we all have multiple hats. So I'm also a wife and a mum and, a sister and, yeah, lots of other roles in daily life like we all do.
Amazing. Jo, I wanted to ask you, when did loneliness stop being a personal feeling and started looking like a public health issue to you?
Well, for me, I can pinpoint that fairly clearly because I can date it to 2020, which was when guilt came about. I was having a chat with my good friend, Michelle Lim. Michelle is one of the co-founders of the peak body addressing loneliness and social isolation in Australia. It's called Ending Loneliness Together. And 2020, we'd already been going with Ending Loneliness Together for about 4 years. And in the conversation I was having with Michelle, we were just tossing around what was happening in the field in general. And we couldn't help but notice that there were a growing number of national organisations beginning to emerge that were addressing this issue, this really important issue of loneliness across society. So, for example, I think it was around 2011, the United Kingdom set up the UK campaign to end loneliness. They were really the trailblazers in the space. By 2016, we had Ending Loneliness Together in Australia and Genwell had come about. By 2017, we also had from Marmalade Trust, a charity in the UK, they had established Loneliness Awareness Week within the UK. And by 2018, I skipped a bit, we had an initiative in New Zealand, and we also had in the UK a minister for loneliness. And then by 2020, we had the Foundation for Social Connection in the United States. What was missing amongst all of this growing number of these national groups and political interests was there was no way that we were talking to each other. We weren't connecting amongst ourselves. A bit ironic, really, given the issue is all about social connection. And so I basically said that to Michelle and said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we set up an initiative that helped to do exactly that, that could bring together the national organisations to provide a space to have those conversations about what their initiatives were, to ask questions about what was working well, what didn't work, and to, in a sense, provide the opportunity for those groups to really share their knowledge and their expertise so that they could then take it back to their home countries and maybe try something new. So that happened around 2020. And that for me was the light bulb moment about the issue becoming really a public one. And of course, since then, we've had interests beyond in other countries. We had the Surgeon General's report in the United States that also put a great deal of the spotlight on loneliness being a public health emergency, and that was the terminology also that the World Health Organization took forward as well. So that by 2024-25, the World Health Organization released their commission, which indicates that indeed social isolation and loneliness are major public health priorities that need concerted attention.
Amazing. So, can you talk a little more about that? Like, how does it look in terms of execution? Like, you said you bring all the bodies together and then you learn from each other, but like, how do you execute that?
It's been a process of trial and error. So initially we had 6 member organizations. I think we're now running close to 30 member organizations, which I guess shows that there is growing interest in what we're trying to achieve. We try and host regular monthly catch-up calls.
Okay.
And it's as simple as that. So anyone can join those calls who is a member organisation. So they send representatives.
Okay.
We, at the moment, are trialling a method of not really tying down a very specific agenda for those meetings so that people feel comfortable to be able to bring to the meeting whatever is on their mind. And allow them the space to ask questions, but also basically to get to know each other as well. Because, of
Right.
course, in the field of social connection, whether it's at the national level, the community level, or the personal level, you don't get very far unless you really trust people. And you build trust by getting to know people, and that needs space and
Yeah.
time and regularity of meetings. So
Yeah.
we do that as one of our main vehicles for communicating between our member organisations. We of course also have a newsletter where we can share what our current projects are, what our current wins might have been, and so on. Yeah, so
Right.
we try a number of obvious things, as well as we had tried initially a Slack channel form of communication.
Hmm.
That wasn't taken up quite so well, but we're now trying WhatsApp group channel chats. So again, it gives
Hmm.
people a little bit of an alternative way of connecting in between the times of our formal meetings.
All right, that's good. And one more thing that I'm curious about, like you take these learnings, now you have some understanding, and how do you execute that other than your like newsletter? Like, what are the initiatives? I mean, we can talk about it in the next questions, or that's also fine. But like, I'm more curious to understand how do you execute these things when in your organization. for the people who need it?
So this is where it's really important to understand that we're a slightly different organization than the national country members. So
Okay.
as Gilk, our role is in a sense to connect the connectors.
Okay. Okay. Got that.
Once we've had those conversations, the member organizations go back to their countries of origin, whether it's in Finland or Japan or Brazil,
Hmm.
and they take what they've learned back to their national organization to help
Got that.
see how it will inform whatever
Got
they're doing. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So
Makes sense.
so we're kind of working at a different level than the people
Yeah.
who actually roll out projects within their own countries. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. Yes. Makes it more clear. So, Joe, what's a moment when you realized, like, oh, we are just treating the symptom and not the cause? Like, was there a moment for you?
Well, probably several, but um, the most prominent moment that happened, bearing in mind my background is in research in psychology. So I was doing a bit of research at that time, which was focused on the fact that a very large body of research has been done now already on interventions or solutions for individual level loneliness.
Hmm.
And so I was reviewing a lot of that literature. And rather pleasingly, as a psychologist, it turned out that the evidence from that larger review was that psychological interventions are amongst the most promising approaches to help reduce feelings of loneliness at the individual level. So it's like, yay, yeah, good bit of research. And we were thinking about how to best then translate that evidence to help bolster it in practice. And of course, to be able to translate that body of research into practice, you need to look at how well all of those psychological interventions are being reported. Like what exactly was done, what was the form of intervention, was it done in groups or with individuals? Um, what were the key ingredients, if you like, of the treatment? You need all of that detail about those psychological treatments so that individual practitioners can carry it out in their daily work. So
Yeah.
that was the research that we were doing at the time. And of course, the thing that sung through then most strongly was all of that work can only ever happen with someone who's already become really very lonely and isolated.
Hmm.
So although it's clear that psychological interventions can work and do work, we're kind of missing a really important piece, which is you need to start thinking, well, how do we take the issue upstream a little bit and look at what are the ways we could actually get to be preventing loneliness from happening in the first instance, or at least um, mitigating the severity of loneliness from developing, because we all know that people are going to get lonely. It's part of the human condition.
Yeah.
But how can we get to a point where people have the skills and resilience to stop that feeling of loneliness from becoming entrenched?
Hmm. And for somebody who would not have a background in psychology, someone like me, what kind of intervention can actually help? Just to give an example.
The psychological interventions that are put forward include what's often called the talking therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and also some other variations along those approaches, including mindfulness, by the way,
Hmm.
given
Hmm.
that we talked about that a little while ago. So, the
Yeah.
benefit of the cognitive behavioral approaches are that it helps to work with a therapist to work out what are the barriers to connecting. And the barriers can be the way you think about things. So your thoughts can be sometimes unhelpful, and you can help to disentangle what are the unhelpful thoughts that can get us into a cycle of avoiding further social connection. We can have a look at how our emotions work in that space of feeling really lonely, how we regulate our emotions. Do we downplay positive emotions, for example, when maybe we should be feeling more positive about things? And do we ruminate on situations socially that maybe didn't work so well? So they're
Yeah.
emotional ways of controlling how we interact with other people. And then there are also behavioral approaches. So the B part in the CBT, the behavioral approaches. Have we got into the habit of um, not being very engaged socially? Um,
Right.
of course, if you're inactive, then you need to turn that around to become more active
Yeah.
and find more opportunities to be able to connect with other people. Because without those opportunities, then we're putting ourselves in a bit of a bind and we end up in a negative spiral.
Right. Right. So, Joe, if connection was a muscle, how do people unknowingly stop using it, and how do they rebuild it safely?
We knew the answer to that in a simple way, then we probably have a Nobel Prize. Look, there's probably lots of explanations to that. The theme that's on my mind most at the moment is it relates to our habits and the kind of bad habits that we can slip into. Just in the same way that if you wanted to be a sporty person and you wanted to be able to do a 5K run, then you'd need to be able to develop the habit to run, maybe
Right.
short distances first,
Yeah.
and progressing to a longer distance. But sometimes we slip into bad habits and we become a bit slothful and we sit on the couch and we eat and we don't exercise at all. And perhaps there's a large element these days of we get captured in a busy life. We
Yeah.
have a lot of pressures to work, um, not just 5 days a week, but 7 days a week and many hours a day as well. And then we get home and we feel that push, that pressure to look after the family, do the routine jobs and chores and so on. And then we slump, perhaps in front of the TV, and we haven't focused at all on our relationships in the pressure of that. And that's really unfortunate. We can end up spending a lot of time um, doing that daily habit of the pressure of work and then home and so on. And it only dawns on us that there's a problem, perhaps, when a big event happens. So maybe we relocate, maybe we change jobs, maybe we go from school to university. But some event happens in our life, and we're, in a sense, in a new environment, starting anew. And then we think, oh, I don't know anybody and I don't have any friends
Yeah.
and I'm far away from family. And you really start to miss those social connections, those really
Yeah.
deep and meaningful
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah.
And that's at the point where we can reconnect with our habits. So this is the opportunity as well as the
Right.
problem,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it gives you the opportunity to then reflect on what your habits have become. And it can give you a moment's pause to think, well, what trajectory do I really want to be on here?
Yeah.
Do I want to be someone who has some really good friendships, has some good colleagues at work, um, who I really feel connected to? Um, do I have family relationships that maybe I've let slide
Yeah.
and I'd like to rebuild again? And then it's a process of trying to rebuild some positive habits to be able to get those meaningful connections back again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking yesterday only, and I thought like we have a whole phone book of numbers and people there, but we hardly have like many connections, right? Who we can really talk to with an open heart and call them anytime.
Yeah. I think a lot of us these days we have perhaps a phone, a powerful gadget in our pocket, and we have so many addresses there, and on social media we have so many connections there.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
But are they really the connections that, yeah, if you had a big problem in your life and you wanted to talk to someone about that problem, that tends to narrow down
yeah,
your focus
yeah,
to the people you can count on. Actually, not also in times of trouble, but if you've had something really joyous that's happened in your life,
yeah,
who would you
to share.
tell? You know? Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's about trying to think of what kind of social world you want to have, and that it not be dominated just by work, because I think work pressures are a key one in modern society.
yeah,
And then that sets the goal, and then you have to work out what are the habits that you can build, what are the little steps that you can build that put you on the path to that longer term goal. Yeah.
yeah. So maybe as a first step, make a few calls, get outside, start talking to strangers in a safe space if you can.
Everyone's goals will be different too. That's
Yeah,
the thing,
yeah,
that's the thing to keep clear in your head. For some people you really want um you want to have some close friends. Your family relationships might be fine. Your work relationships might be fine, but you feel that
yeah,
what's missing is friendships.
yeah,
Um, and so your goals and the strategies that you might want to build will differ if that's the case versus if you've had maybe problems in the family and what you really want to do is rebuild those connections within the family. But
yeah,
yes, you're right in as much as then it's about working out what are some of the simple and easy steps you can take towards that. Don't necessarily worry about, well, I want friends, so somehow I'm going to be able to meet someone and they're going to be instantly my friend. Life we know doesn't work that way.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
But you can then say, well, if I need to make new friends, that means I need to find opportunities of where I might meet people who have similar
yeah,
interests to me. So
yeah,
maybe I can scour the phone book and have a look at what are the social clubs in my area, and are any of those matching my interests? Maybe
right,
I can sign up to one of
right,
those. Um,
yeah, yeah,
if some people don't even really want friendships, they just want to be able to be feeling like they're known in their neighborhood. Well, if that's the case, then make it that you schedule to get on the bus once a week to go into your local village or your local town and pop into the local coffee shop or visit the local chemist and make connections with people in your community.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So, Joe, you've advised governments and the WHO. What's behind the scenes moment where you saw a policy shift almost happen and something got in the way?
um, I have had the privilege and the joy of helping a little bit in the space of the World Health Organization. Um, I was on the technical advisory team, a large number of us. We were working on the WHO guidance on mental health policy and strategic actions. Big document, lots of people all over the world contributing to how to get mental health policy improved. What was really exciting was that there was a recognition of the need to be very person-centered, recovery-focused. This is my background in mental health and illness. It's like, yes, this is great. Recovery focus, take a holistic approach and so on. And so there was a lot of general comment, for example, about including the discussion of the social determinants of mental health. What does
Hmm.
that mean? Well, that means you need to seriously consider things like what's the financial situation of the person with a mental health problem? Are they
Right.
experiencing poverty? Can we solve that? Are they experiencing homelessness at the moment? Is there domestic violence? So there's a whole lot of those social aspects of our daily life that
Mm.
we know can be stressors that will then make mental health poor, or it might even um, contribute to the onset of a mental health disorder.
Right.
What was overlooked in this big piece of work, this guidance document, was that social isolation and loneliness was also one of those social determinants of poor mental health.
Ah, okay.
So we spent a lot of time talking about the evidence of those links. We know there's lots of evidence, for example, that loneliness in particular can be a trigger for anxiety, for depression, for cognitive problems, including the onset of dementia, for example.
Hmm.
There's some new data also linking loneliness to psychotic disorders, the issue that I talked about before.
Right.
And so it's really important that social isolation not be overlooked. And one of the real leaders in the field of loneliness research, John Cacioppo, had this phrase that really came to mind and resonated at this point, which is loneliness is often stigmatized, trivialized, or ignored. And it's usually passively ignored. They've just overlooked the fact
Right.
that it's a
Right.
bigger problem than most people realize. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that loneliness and isolation was mentioned throughout this guidance document. But then we took it one step further because there was a risk that it would be just seen as a factor that can cause or at least contribute to the onset of mental illness. But it's much more than that. You need to think about loneliness and isolation and how do we develop policies around including that in, say, the assessment processes that mental health services use. How do we include training for this issue for mental health professionals so that they feel confident and competent to deal with the issue? So that was a bigger array of issues. But then the final piece was not to just focus on social isolation and loneliness as being a potential causal or risk factor for mental illness, but actually as an endpoint in itself. You need to have good social health, good social connections for overall well-being. And it's ironic, really, because I think way back in the 1940s, the World Health Organization themselves laid out that good mental health is not simply the absence of disease, it's the presence of good physical health, good mental health, and good social health.
Yeah.
But since the 1940s to very recently, that social health piece has been trivialized and ignored. So I think that was because it came about at the time when the other work was being done by the World Health Organization through the Commission on Social Connection, that they were very much motivated to bring in these issues throughout the whole of their policy document. And so we were pleased to find that that was the end result, and it's referenced throughout every section of that guidance document.
Got that. So before we move into, like, how do we design these initiatives and all that, like, for me or for anybody listening will always think like, loneliness is if I'm alone, but people can also be alone when, they are around people, or, surrounded by people, for example, even in a workspace.
Yeah.
So if you had to design a connection first aid kit, like, what would be the items that would go in, that kind of a kit where people can connect better?
Okay. So before we go to that, what I'd really like to do is come back to the main issue that you mentioned right at the start, which is distinguishing loneliness from being alone, because that's often where these
Yeah.
podcast conversations often start. Through Gilk, we set our definition of loneliness as the subjective, unwanted, or distressing experience of lack of connection with others, along with the desire for more or more frequent and more meaningful social relationships. So why is that definition important, and why are any definitions important? Come to that matter. Well, okay, let's break it all down. It's a subjective feeling, right? That helps to distinguish loneliness from social isolation, which is the objective state of not having many social connections, not
Right.
not having a large social network, not meeting with people frequently, if at all, and so on. So that's objective. You can count how many people do you know, how many times do you see people in a day or in a week, right? They're objective markers.
Yeah.
So our definition begins with that distinction of loneliness is subjective. It's a feeling, right? Then we said it's unwanted and or distressing. In other words, it's a negative feeling. Now that element is important because it helps us to distinguish from other states that are similar but a little bit separate, like solitude. In the case of solitude, you can be alone, and it's either a neutral emotional feeling or sometimes actually quite positive. People actually seek out
Yeah.
solitude
Yeah.
because of its benefit. They seek out moments of being alone because it's beneficial.
Yeah.
So that's another way that you can help to distinguish loneliness from solitude through the definition.
Hmm.
So the definition says it's subjective, it's unwanted and or distressing, and it's a lack of connection to other people.
Right.
Together, that helps it distinguish it from states like depression. Loneliness is a negative feeling about a lack of connection to other people. That's the space that it sits in.
Hmm.
Depression is a negative feeling that goes way beyond that. Depression is a negative feeling about lack of connection to yourself, but also connection to other people. It's a negative feeling about others, about the world, and about the future.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
much broader state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, that's how the definition progresses. And then there's the other motivating side of the definition, which is this issue around loneliness also involves a desire to be connected to other people through meaningful relationships. And that's the bit that's often missed. That's the positive driver side
Yeah.
of the experience of loneliness. When you are lonely, you often feel, at least initially, I would like to have that connection. I'd like to reconnect with other people. And so you typically go out and you do something about it.
Right.
Sometimes barriers that get in the way, and then that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it does have a motivating side to its behavior. If you
Hmm.
think about the parallel, um, a definition of hunger would not just be that it's a negative feeling of I don't have enough food, but it's
Yeah.
also I want more food, right? So it's
Yeah.
got both
Yeah.
of those elements.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that full context of the experience of loneliness.
Hmm.
Because unless we understand that full experience, then we will not be able to target our solutions and our interventions appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. Got that. So I like the fact when you said that you still have a desire to go out and do something about it, whereas in depression I think even the thought of meeting anybody is something that you mostly don't have, or you kind of push it like, "Yeah, I don't want to
Yes,
meet anybody," right?
yeah, that's right. And it's often the case that in prolonged or what's sometimes called chronic loneliness, where it's been really intense or severe or long lasting, that feeling of drive can drop because you've been
Hmm.
trying and trying and trying and
Yeah.
not succeeding. And so
Hmm.
we're learning a lot now about how that drive to connect may change and decrease over time. And therefore, again, you need to address that in your solutions if you're going to have success.
Right.
So those elements are the actual complex experience of loneliness, which, it's hard to get your head around because there are many different
Yeah.
components too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Joe, that's really helpful. When you talked about solutions, I would like to ask you a little later on the design of things, but how would you come to the second part of the question? And I'm sure you already have your thoughts on that when I asked you, like, what will be a connection first aid kit then?
Yes. So 3 items that I might put in a first aid kit if you're thinking about solutions for people, for individuals, leaving aside the issue of what governments and larger organizations might want to do. So the 3 items I'd put in a toolkit would be a map, a directory, and a calendar. And this is why. The map I'm talking about is you need to have a map of your social world, if you like.
Hmm.
And it's often helpful here to think about um, a series of concentric circles as part of your map. In the inner part, the inner circle, you have your close family and close friends.
Okay.
In the next layer of your map, you might have people in your community or your workspace. And then in the broader circle beyond that, you might have people in your wider social world who you don't really know all that well, but you know, oh, yes, I've seen that person in the village, or I know that
Hmm.
person at work through so and so. So you're kind of going from these closer connections through to the next layer and the next layer. And why is that important? Because as we said before, everybody's experience of loneliness is different. Some people really need help with that inner circle. Some people are actually fine with their inner circle, but what they really want is closer connections to people through their workspace or their daily routine. And some people actually just want to feel acknowledged and known in their broader community. And that's what's important for them. And so a map can help you to map out your social world. What are the social connections in your world that are working well? And where are the areas that you want to build up? Because everyone's experience is different. So that's why a map helps.
Yeah. The first time you said map, I was like, I hope it's not the Google map. Okay.
No, different kind of map. It's a tool to help you work out what are the types of social connections in your world that are missing or not working well, and what are the ones that are working well, because you might want to keep those continuing to work well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you don't want to neglect those. You want to be able to
Yeah.
work on them. So that's the first item. The second item is a directory.
Hmm.
And why I mention that is that here in Australia, I did a lot of work, as I said before, with ending loneliness together. And we thought also around this idea of a directory. And this, in this case, it's an online directory of services to help people find connection that will work for them. And it's called the Ending Loneliness Directory. You can find it on the web. And why that's important is that you do need some help. You can't just rely on
Yeah.
the resources yourself, the groups that you're aware of and so on.
Right.
You need help to navigate what's out there. What are the potential possibilities for reconnecting in your community?
Right.
And then you have to think also about, are you in a position to be able to go out into the world to join a social club or to join your community in some way? That's great if you are, and a directory can help you locate those and tell you where they are. But if you're a person who is stuck at home, who can't leave the home because you've got mobility issues or you don't have
Yeah.
access to transport, or maybe cost is important, so you can't really go out, you also need to have a directory to help you connect with services that will literally come to you through a computer or through a phone. And that's how we set up the Ending Loneliness directory. And
Hmm.
it needs to be a resource that's reliable and it's accurate so that you know you can trust it as a go-to place to
Right.
find information about those services that can either come to you or you can go to the community. We did also add into the directory a next level of services as well. So, for example, we provide a list of psychologists who say that they will help people who are having perhaps um, more serious concerns about loneliness and how it's
Right.
affecting their life.
Right.
And they tell us that that is a part of the work that they do and the kind of service that they offer.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
our directory in Australia is set up so that it's free to use, it's free to access the directory, there's no charge to that, and it's free for service providers to list their service on the directory.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a gateway. It is helping people who've already identified that they have a concern and gives them an opportunity to connect in a way that suits them. So that's the second item in the toolkit is you need a good directory so that you
Hmm.
can actually either go out to them or they can
Yeah.
come to you.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's why directory is helpful. Having a single reliable directory for one country, which is what our ambitious goal was with the Ending
Yeah.
Loneliness directory, is also really important because otherwise, if there are multiple directories, where you get sort of
Yeah.
feeling, I'd say flummoxed. You get
Yeah.
lost. You don't know where to go to for a reliable
Right.
resource. So what
Right.
we've been trying to encourage is the idea that ours is the go-to place, and
Right.
it was designed in combination with a group called Info Exchange, who specialize in the development of online resources like that. And we were very grateful to their support in producing that resource. So that's the
Right.
second element, was a directory. And the third element in the toolkit would be a calendar. Why a calendar? To be able to build up habits, good habits of social connection. Again, this is now trying to relate everything together. You need to try to do things in an intentional way. You have to plan to do it, even if it's a small step. In fact, it's good if it's a small, easy step. So if you say to yourself, I plan to join a new social club on Monday, the 12th of March, whatever, and you put it in your calendar, then it will help to get you to think about what do I need to do to get to be able to do that, right? So it's
Hmm.
helping with your planning and your intention to do that. You could put in your calendar that you intend to make 2 phone calls each week to people that you were previously friendly with, and you might like to renew that friendship or strengthen that friendship. You pop it
Yeah.
in the calendar so that 2 days a week, you know that you've planned to do that kind of activity. And
Yeah.
again, you can see how this expands out and it can be made tailored to your needs. But the thing is about with developing friendships and really meaningful social connections, you need to do it consistently and regularly. And a
Yeah.
calendar can really help to get you to
Yeah.
plan, I'm going to take this little step towards getting my social world to be a little bit stronger and richer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I think those three things would be good in your toolkit.
That's amazing. So, Joe, when you think about the future, does it make you more worried or are you more hopeful? And why is that?
Okay. The honest answer is both. Worried and hopeful. um, worried. Why am I worried? Worried is because, again, it relates to um, a piece of research that I had the privilege of being involved with recently, where we started to look at the intersection of two big issues, one being social isolation and loneliness, and how that intersects with the issue of climate change.
Hmm.
And that makes me worried. when you start to dig into the evidence base on climate change and how it impacts on our social health, there's so many effects that it's hard to get your head across. Some of the obvious things like um, climate change is leading to increases in temperature, in the number of floods and the frequency of fires and so on, especially here in
Yeah.
Australia, lots of drought and so on. And of course, that necessarily is going to increase as climate change progresses. And so we get mass movements of people, we've had very bad bushfires again this season already. And whole communities get disrupted and separated, and so
Yeah.
they have to move into new places. So
Hmm.
that can then lead to further social isolation and loneliness
Yeah.
because they're not. That's kind of like an obvious example.
Yeah.
But there are other more subtle issues going on too. So, for example, the increases of heat that we're experiencing often means that children don't play outside anymore because it's
Yeah.
too hot.
Yeah.
Well, that means they're playing indoors, and that means they're often not connecting with children, doing the rough and tumble play outside that they would ordinarily. And that's
Yeah.
changing their social world and their social expectations. Other examples, um, concerns about where climate change is leading us is leading to a lot of young people, young adults in particular, to be thinking about not having children anymore
Mm.
because of their concerns about what's in store in the future.
Right.
And that has its other social connection ramifications
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
means that you are further disrupting family connections. There's not going to be grandchildren. There are not going to be intergenerational connections between grandchildren and grandparents, for example.
Mm.
And
Mm.
as we age, we often get to a point where we really rely for a lot of our social support on our children and grandchildren. So that's another
Yeah.
element.
Yeah.
Um, Other examples are a little bit more indirect, but again, the rise of temperature that is associated with climate change is often associated with more violent behavior.
Hmm.
Um, we are humans, we have an operating range
Right.
physiologically, and when
Right.
that is pushed, our tempers fray and
Mm.
we get to be more violent. And that
Mm.
in turn leads
Oh,
to problems with our social relationships. Of
got
course,
that.
there are obvious connections around changes in climate that are affecting food production and distribution. And you can see how that too can have impacts in terms of I'm going to preserve my food supply chain for me
Yeah.
and not worry so much about food
Yeah.
supply chains for other people. Again, all impairing our
Right.
social cohesion and social connection in society. They're just a
Mm.
few of the examples of how social health and climate change intersect and have really big impacts on each other. And so it's in that space that I have quite a lot of worries about how do we intervene. Um, the most obvious point that we make in this bit of research that we have just done, which is a review piece of the literature, is to point out that the work that's currently being done on climate change needs to always consider the impact on social connection as part of its agenda.
Right.
Currently, that piece is being neglected again, it's being
Yeah. Yeah.
overlooked. And so that's one of the big points that we highlight through that work, and we hope to make it a much more visible issue that might then prompt further research and look at further solutions as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an area where I have a lot of worry. On the other hand, um, there's some good signs for hope, going back to your original question.
Yeah.
We now, just in Gilk alone, have, as I said before, around 30 member organisations who are all nationally oriented, not-for-profit organisations.
Hmm.
I think we are now in every continent. We still want more, but it just shows that there is an interest and willingness to come together to address the issue of loneliness and isolation. So
Yeah.
that's a really big hope. The work that the World Health Organization have done, of course, has given it masses of visibility. So we really hope now that a lot more governments will take action and take this issue much more seriously. Um, yeah, so I think there's a lot of room for optimism, um, cautious optimism, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. That actually resonated a lot because there is a saying, I'm sure you've heard of it, that it takes a village to bring up a kid, right? So
Yes.
we don't have kids, and we have a little friend, like a 4-year old, who stays next door, and I see the moment he's in front of a screen, it is like so hard to take that screen away from him, right? But when he's playing outside with us, he's like in a great mood. uh, and he'll always keep going back to telling us that, why don't you give me a mobile, why don't you give me a mobile? And if you give in to that request, he just becomes somebody else, right? You cannot take that screen away from him.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very hard. So
Yeah.
kind of ties to the piece that you're talking about, like kids are becoming more isolated, no wonder they're getting crankier or angry, and then all that flows into the feeling of being lonely in the future as well. So
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I think we have some particular concerns or needs to think about children and developmentally, the amount of time that they are spending
Yeah.
now on phones or devices of some sort.
Mhm.
Um, we're probably
Yeah.
depriving them of key experiences in how you interact with other kids
Yeah.
and other parents and other people
Yeah.
generally,
Yeah.
and how you navigate when your friend doesn't want to share. And how you navigate when mum says, "No, you've got to eat the vegetables on your plate as well as the meat," or whatever. Um, the mini frustrations, the daily frustrations of life that are part of growing up and learning how to be in society.
Yeah.
Um, and it's important that they still have that opportunity to practice in a safe way at home,
Yeah.
and they are running out of those opportunities if they're constantly on a device and perhaps misunderstanding the nature of that relationship compared to what really goes on in the world around them. Mm, yeah.
Amazing. So, Joe, this is a really amazing. We don't talk much about loneliness, and I'm so glad that we talked about something that has been neglected. It's such a many people will get a lot of perspective from that. But I would just like to ask once again, just one thing that our listeners could do this week to feel more connected. Any suggestions from your side?
Okay. It's hard to keep me to one. It's going to be my first comment.
Go for
A-
it.
and I would also remind everyone that feelings of loneliness are really normal. So, don't panic. It is part of the human condition that we all need social connection. It is what's called a basic psychological need. It's a basic need of human beings. So feeling a little lonely every now and again is normal, and it usually comes and then goes.
Right.
But what do you do to help when things are getting like that? Some simple steps. One I mentioned previously is think about those relationships that you've had previously, someone else you've felt close to in the past, and maybe reconnect with them. So here's a for example. I've had some friends back in college a long time ago now,
Yeah.
And over the years, we kind of let things slide a little, and maybe we sent the one time a year card at Christmas and that sort of.
Yeah.
But you know what? We all decided, a little foursome, that maybe we'd like to all reconnect. And so we do. And now we have, due to the wonders of technology, we
Mhm.
reconnect every month or so and we plan it into the calendar. And
Nice.
we are getting back to that close friendship that we had way back in our college days. And it's a
Mm.
joy. So think about whether there are people from your past that maybe those relationships have died down a bit, but maybe you could rekindle that friendship. So that's one possibility. In the world of connecting, another approach is always what's easy. You know, we're kind of lazy people in a sense, humans. We like to go with the path of least resistance. What's an easy approach? Well, an easy approach in a sense is to think about your neighbors.
Mm.
They're all around you, right?
Yeah.
We often
Yeah.
take them for granted, but how about reaching out to just your neighbors and say, "Hi, I know we haven't chatted for a while. Do you want to come over? Do you want to have a cup of tea? You know,
Yeah.
do you want to just
Yeah.
have a chat?" And see where it takes you to get to reconnect with your own neighborhood. Now, I know, again, that's not always possible. Maybe you're not
Yeah.
mobile, maybe you're shy, maybe you've tried it before and you really feel like, oh, that's not going to work. Well, okay, if it's not right for you, but this is just highlighting you don't have to do something, what's the phrase? It doesn't have to be rocket science.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
to be little steps about what are the simple ways that you might be able to reconnect in your neighborhood. The other side of it is we often think about how our connections are valuable to us in terms of the support we get from other people.
Yeah.
But also, connections are really valuable in terms of what it allows us to give. So, another approach is if you can, have you considered volunteering? Give back to your community
Yeah.
in a way that works for you. It doesn't have to be, again, a huge commitment. I know these days volunteering as a whole scene has changed tremendously. Sometimes you can volunteer for 1 hour a week
Yeah.
if that's the time that you can manage. But giving back, you end up helping other people, but you also experience the joy of feeling valued and having a meaningful role in your
Yeah.
community. And so
Yeah.
that's another angle on different ways that you can connect to the world around you.
Yeah, actually, the first one, like we've been trying to connect some of our friends from the school days, and every time it's like two are there, but then we don't go up, end up on the call. I think this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link. Whoever wants to join in, join. Even if it's one person, let's do a monthly thing. So yeah,
That's
that's a
that's
really good
about
idea.
that's about consistency. It's about scheduling and your
Yeah.
calendar, you see. It's
Yes.
about
Yes.
making it
Yes.
easy. Make the habit something that's gonna happen more
Yeah.
often than the
Yeah.
habit of not connecting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good idea.
Amazing, Joe. I think I got some really good tips. I'm really, really glad, like I said, that we talked about this topic and you having so much experience in this field. It was really great to listen from you. I'm sure whoever takes the time to watch this will have really good takeaways on this part, and I hope that we all can start reconnecting, start talking to people, even if it's not an old friend, even if somebody new that we meet, if we can spend like 2 minutes just having a normal chat. It helped me in the past when I was going through a phase of isolation. Yes, I think this was really amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much for sparing the time. And I would like to put the loneliness directory in the podcast link so that people can access that. And just one last thing, where can people find you if they want to understand something more about your initiative? Is LinkedIn the best place, or how do they reach you?
You can certainly find me on LinkedIn, And you can do a Google search for the charity, which is the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, and it's abbreviated to GILC. So you can find GILC on the websites.
Amazing.
Thank
All
you, and
right,
it's been
Joe.
a pleasure to join you.
Thank you so much. No, I should thank you for taking the time out. I know you have a busy schedule, and this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe.
That's okay. Thank you.